Welcome to another episode of Mass Timber March Madness. Pleased to have Susan Jones of Atelier Jones, and she's got a great presentation lined up for you. Take it away, Susan.
Thank you so much, Greg. This has been a pretty exciting platform, and it's an amazing amount of information that's being transmitted. I've been lucky enough to sit in on a few of them, a few of you who are on this call also speaking, and I'm really thrilled to be asked by Greg to also participate in this. My only, the craziness is about March Madness, I think is a basketball thing, Greg. So, I haven't watched March Madness in my recent life, but I hear about it a lot from my son. And I think Georgetown University is going into the Big Eight or won the Big Eight or something. So it's exciting, but I don't know anything about basketball other than I watch it once in a while. So don't ask me about that. But I think the format is awesome. And I really appreciate the YouTube continuation that these presentations, all of our presentations, live on forever. So with that, I am going to just jump into my presentation, and I look forward to your comments and questions, and I'll leave them at the end, and we'll get into the discussion, and hopefully we can move through these slides and actually have a real interactive talk at the end. So let's see if I can advance this slide here. Maybe I advanced, maybe I didn't here. Just worked a minute ago. There we go. This is Mass Timber 2.0, this talk, and I'm not going to go into the CLT house and the CLT church and CLT schools. Thanks to folks like Lloyd Alter, who I think is on this call, a lot of those projects have gotten tremendous and wonderful attention, and I really appreciate it, and I'm honored by that. But many of you do know our work from the past 8 or 9 years, and we've been innovating with this new to the US material for some time, and we continue to innovate today. Many of you know our CLT house, our story of building this experimental house, this demonstration house. And our CLT house became a lens that opened up vast new design territories for our practice, for me personally. And it also became a broader and deeper understanding of the issues confronting our planet. The logos of our house, the study of our house, became a new way for me to understand the house of the planet that we all live on, a new ecology. From a deeper understanding and personal understanding of forest ecology, which we're practicing on an almost weekly basis. This is my lovely husband, Marco, working on our family forest. As you can see, it needs a lot of thinning and a lot of care and a lot of forest management. And when I say forest management, this is the kind of forest management I'm talking about. These privately owned forests, often by small family landowners, really need our help and our nation's help. And I thank you all for working on this and understanding the complexities and the nuances of forestry, especially in the fire-threatened West. But the huge challenge also that we learned about with working with lower carbon construction at a scale that would potentially make a difference in our damming AEC's industry's carbon footprint, to the life safety challenges posed by building tall with wood, to understanding the entire supply chain from the forest to the end-of-life design, which is still understudied in my opinion, and the need for rigorous and transparent LCA analyses made this an enormous challenge. These polyvalent lenses through which to see our own mass timber work kept propelling me forward into more and more leadership positions, from the technical to the policy, and included helping to change our national building codes, to designing national and international fire test protocols, to being a voice for collective action for our forests, and for what sustainable or climate smart forestry means, depending on your audience, to a deeper call for a careful and transparent LCA analyses that reach deep into the forest supply chain and out into the international end-of-life analyses. I have cherished these leadership moments, from both the technical to the political, from the scientific to the policy, for their ability to impact our damming building industry's carbon footprint, and the related role that mass timber has played in being a new agent of disruption in these old and tired so-called Pacific Northwest timber wars that date back decades, wars that have left deep scars of division and bitterness in our beloved Pacific Northwest, and are greatly in need of being seen through new 21st century lenses of sustainability, technology, equity, and activism. I have cherished the broad and sweeping ability to collaborate on shared academic and federal grant research programs at multiple scales with academic leaders like the University of Washington or the Tallwood Institute, to major environmental nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, not to mention the deep and abiding support of the US Forest Service and the USDA. These agents of policy crafting, such as the International Code Council, or Architecture 2030, AIA National, and all of the incredible relationships of layers that these collaborative settings have engendered, have been very precious to me. And some of these relationships are the strongest of my professional life. And I'm really thankful and grateful to many of you who have been involved with me as my friends. I've been very lucky to have a view into and a voice in so many different public institutions, from the US Forest Service to the Washington State Legislature, and have worked with so many, many incredibly dedicated and brilliant people along the way. I have learned deep humility and seen firsthand the hubris of my profession, the architectural profession, where we architects sometimes think we can know everything. And that hubris can often hold us back from truly learning at the feet of the people who have just spent their lifetimes mastering the subjects that we just did our 24-hour deep dive into. Humility is a powerful tool to learn even more. Today, Atelier Jones is working on projects. The code is law in 5 states, available for all jurisdictions and project teams across the country to use as they will, including my own project team. Atelier Jones has rebounded from the deficit of my own attention during those difficult code regulation years and is building again. We have the opportunity of a lifetime to design and build with the very codes that I helped write, and to test them with new collaborative partners, from contractors like Swinnerton Mass Timber to engineers like DCI and the code officials in my own hometown at Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, to my colleagues, my dear Atelier Jones colleagues in my incredibly focused and driven office at Atelier Jones in Seattle. I'm going to present here 3 projects, Mass Timber 2.0, that build on our first generation of mass timber projects, the CLT House, CLT Church, and CLT Schools. These were smaller scale experimental demonstrations. They allowed us to explore the rich design potential available to us through this strange, radical, new, large plank, the CLT blank, as some call it, and what it could mean for our profession as a design element. So today I'm going to present our Mass Timber 2.0 work on 3 emerging residential projects at all different scales, from the mini to the max, that begin to express Atelier Jones's current trajectory to scale up our projects and to scale up our office. We are particularly embracing the technology that enables the design freedom of prefabrication territory accompanies mass timber and makes an even deeper impact on our communities and neighborhoods. In order to bring this very warm, very personal, very natural experience of wood into a variety of domestic settings, from large-scale buildings to single-family homes that are built to be replicated and planned for remote, difficult-to-access locations where the power of prefabrication can be fully realized. The coexistence of these 3 new scales is very exciting for our office, and I can't wait to introduce you to Mass Timber 2.0 at Atelier Jones. So the first project is a small remote house in the east of Washington, and it's located outside of Mazama. It's with a very dear client who we've worked with on other modular projects in the city of Seattle, well, actually the city of Bremerton. And this client is a contractor by trade, and he's very sophisticated about understanding a lot of the powers of that prefabrication work. He's doing work for some larger tech companies right now with mass timber, and it was an experimental house that we're building for him out in the Mazama, in this beautiful and delicate landscape. We were challenged by weather, of course, which comes in with snow at about mid-October, and he wanted to get all the mass timber up before that point. And that build, I'm happy to present, was finished in 5 days, which was really an exciting moment. But the planning of the project really depended on the repetition of a modular And we just talked a lot about what that meant as a client. We had been working on a volumetric modular project in this urban infill project, not a mass timber project in Bremerton. It was being produced offshore, and we knew the power of creating volumetric modules with deep integrated utility systems that would allow those picks from the crane to be simplified and fast and efficient. But what we learned for this project was that with the mass timber, the prefabricated flat pack really makes a difference because of the remoteness of the location, the smallness of the roads, and transporting some of those volumes of modularity was going to be difficult and potentially not as repeatable for every site. So we began to think of this as a flat pack with certain modular elements within it. And the first step was, of course, in design, where we began to demonstrate a single modular, which could be replicated in a number of ways as a sleeping mod here in these two elements, or a living mod, and that all of the utilities would be stacked along one wall that would come out to some sort of street or utility grid or off-grid opportunity, and that these two sleeping mods and the two living mods, this is about a 1,600 square foot house total. They're each about 20 by 20 in their square per pure format, then could be reconfigured, of course, and for over a multitude of opportunities. Next slide. And so we looked very carefully at the prefabrication, working with a variety, keeping our dimensions based loosely at this point on Structurlam, who did provide the mass timber for this project, but also thinking about the future where we could have as much flexibility as possible. So working with modulars that worked with grid modulars that worked with the Vaughan of 4 feet, or the possible 12 feet of Katera, 11'9", I think it is, to the 10 to 11 of Kalishnikov and Structurlam, as well as to be as flexible as possible. This house is located up in the north of the Mazama, not far from the Canadian border and not far from the two Spokane-Colville related Washington state. Oregon gets a little far, but we were open to looking at anybody in the Pacific Northwest as a very local set of suppliers that we would work with. An earlier design drawing looking at some of the opportunities of expressing that modularity as the two simple building pods here, sleeping pods, and the build. It was a long, it's always a fun story to tell about how the foundation comes together, which is of course concrete. You can see it, the bit of concrete right there. And the concrete took most of the summer to get the contractor out there and figure it out, pour it, and then he was pouring in the fall. And while the CLT was kind of on hold, just waiting for this CLT to fly in. It finally did around, I think it was November 1st or 15th or something. And this is day 2. This is the picture I got from my client one time, email like a late Thursday afternoon. And I said, Kyle, I'm going to be there by Friday morning at 11 o'clock. I jumped in the car, drove the 3 hours across the state. And I think this is day 2 or this might be day 3, and this is when I arrived. This is day 3 here, actually. When I arrived, this is my photo. That was Kyle's photo. You can see the weather's changed. They're building as fast as possible to try to get in before the snow came, which you can see it's already in the hinterlands here. But there's a whole batch of snow that's projected to fall by Monday morning, and so they had to finish it up. This was Friday that I took this picture. By Saturday and Sunday, it was going to be done, and believe it or not, they did make that deadline. And this was with a crew that wasn't particularly sophisticated. It was a local contractor. They had never worked with CLT. They were excited and game to try it, but the panels went up as smoothly as possible in the remote rural location. And really the only issue was the foundation, which was a little bit, the concrete foundation, which had been poured a little askew. So it was a real win for the panels for mass timber. This is when I left it on day. This actually must have been day 4 when I got the photo from Kyle, just right before they were able to finish out the build on the 5th floor on the 5th day. And it's a really exciting, simple project that is a very I'm not even sure if I can say proof of concept, but it was a test for this contractor, this architect, and the owner to begin to try to replicate this house, showing how quickly it can go ahead in these remote locations. I'm really grateful to my client for pursuing this further. The next project I'm going to talk about is a mid-scale project, and it is it's an R&D modular project is the name, but it's a good project also, in that it's a very narrow, strange site. This is the site that we're looking at. You can see the parking lot in the back, and because of its very tight dimensions of 33 by 100, there was a tremendous amount of site constraints. It's also a site that we are personally, as a family, taking this on as I don't want to call it a development project because it sounds so grandiose, but I guess we are acting as the developer. At least we're acting as the owner in here. It was a little site that my husband and I bought some 10, 12 years ago, when maybe even longer, maybe 15 years ago, before the big boom in Seattle. And it was a leftover site, and it feels very leftover in this photo, which is why I always start out with it. It was a site that was part of the Washington State Department of Transportation expansion through the I-90 corridor. And you can't see it on purpose here because there's a tunnel that goes right through underneath these homes, and they created a park over the lid of it, which is a beautiful new park that it really enlivened this and is enlivening this entire neighborhood. There's also an elementary school right over here to the right, and so it's a vast kind of barren landscape. But most excitingly, there's the light link rail station is going to be right about a half mile away from this. So all of a sudden, this rather distant, not very friendly, not very pedestrian friendly site becomes a real link to the University of Washington, to the I-90 link over to Microsoft, and it really becomes a place that is enlivening and, yes, gentrifying this very delicate little ecosystem of a neighborhood with all of its attendant issues of equity and concern about that. So we were trying to balance a number of thoughts about this, and in between as well, Seattle in that 15 years experienced an upzone of this area from the density. It's still LR1, which is an incredibly low density element, but it does have increased FAR and no density. This is a technical geeky thing. I'm not going to get into that, but we could put more units on it, is the short answer. So you'll see in these schemes that we went through a series of options here. This is a large boulevard called Martin Luther King, and it's a large highway that extends throughout Seattle, like in the back of Seattle, on the east side of Seattle. And there's this small little Judkin Street and 26th Avenue that used to be an old streetcar neighborhood, and there was a trolley car that went up here, and there was some old little cafes. This is an amazing Church of the Bethel Church, I believe. It's a wonderful place and community gathering. There's a lot of small single family homes that already have a tremendous amount of density, attached dwelling units in the basement, a series of very entrepreneurial owners. But you can see what the density, the zoning allows, are these two very large townhouses that were built right to the other side of our site. Currently, there's other townhouses here as well as this vacant lot. But the south-facing views towards the south and the territorial views towards the park were really one of the things that I was excited about, was being able to just create an edge to this and a view from MLK as transportation came up, and a bit of privacy and sun for these units in here. So initially, this was about a 10-year-old drawing. Well, that's not true, but anyway, we were looking at these townhouses here that would be potentially on a plinth, looking at some CLT layouts. I think this is in my book, actually. And we were just going to do two units by right is all we were allowed. And I got kind of stubborn and said, no, I really want to do 3. This is really the most perfect project for this site, is what I was envisioning. But this is actually was not allowed by the zoning before, and is even and the parking has transformed a lot of complexity. So this was an early scheme that we still think has some appropriateness. But then we went through the big crisis in the late 2019s, pre-COVID, where there was an incredible dearth of living spaces for people. People were flooding into Seattle looking for lower, more affordable, though this would be considered a middle income project, places to live. And so at one point we go to 12 units here that were highly dense and small, really the classic CDU. And then, as we all know, what happens is that COVID hits, and the CDUs, people are now moving out of Seattle, and CDUs are now becoming a little bit more suspect in terms of some of their desirability in the younger, markets. So we then transformed again, and I'm going to show you the scheme that we're currently pursuing. And this is the little site with the 2 existing townhomes, and this is potential development, which is not there yet, but could be located to the east. This is facing south. We're digging slightly into this slowly sloped site, creating a 3-bedroom family-sized unit, which is required for zoning, which may or may not be mass timber, but it'll be most likely integrated into the concrete foundation systems. Slab on grade for most of it, and then a little bit of retaining wall here at the west. Putting the circulation on the north side of the building against the townhouses. Sorry, guys. And then building up with what we were looking at as 8 smaller studio units, not CDU units, over a 3-bedroom project, and then the entry and landscaping at the front. We were working with, thanks to the U.S. Forest Service, a really exciting grant that we were able to procure. I really appreciate those who were able to help make that happen with our partners on that grant, Swinnerton Mass Timber and DCI Engineers. And we were looking at a volumetric modular initially. And as we began to think about the value of the volumetric modular, we ran into some questions that were similar to the modular concepts of the earlier project in Bremerton that I mentioned, the non-mass timber, and also the mass timber project in Mazama, where we began to really question the value of a volumetric of just transporting air and the production of that. We're currently then, but this was built on that assumption that we had 8 units over the 1. And then being our own developer, I suppose we had a little more latitude to explore some other ones. And as COVID took root, we also realized that these small units that we showed in the last project were probably not going to be as desirable. So we began to think about a 2-story unit, which would be also mass timber and not a volumetric modularity, but using prefabricated elements. So coming in, just as a quick run through, coming in a little door, up the stairs to a sleeping loft up here, and then beginning to think and pull apart the elements that could be prefabricated. So for instance, this kitchen bath unit, which goes up to the 2nd floor and becomes a single unit. This could be a single 2-story unit. We could begin looking at this, a prefabricated facade with this built-in balcony that becomes a private amenity space, and have this as the prefabricated element, potentially a prefabricated utility shaft underneath here, and potentially prefabricated shear walls, not to mention the prefabrication of the entire mass timber. So that's where we're at. This is a very transparent presentation of our project. We have a couple of elevation projects. There we go. Looking at the mass timber, looking potentially at like a single panel that could be cut out, because the dimensions are very conducive to, looks like 60'10", and we probably get that down to 60, and maybe this is 10 foot high, and maybe that's a single panel with some cutouts. You know, we're really excited about seeing this project as making the picks of the crane as efficient as possible, and we're working with, Swinnerton has been great and very helpful about looking at some of those elements, potentially with this prefabricated utility wall and potentially the shear walls in here going vertically. This is where we were at a few months ago, I guess. It seems like yesterday, showing the 8 studios. And then recently, as we're transforming this into a potential 2-unit project or 2-story unit project, thinking about how we create that balcony and the depth and lowering the amount of glazing for cost reasons and for life safety reasons as well, so to create sort of maybe potentially a 2-story unit that has some modulation to allow some shading in this. We're going to be trying to put as much insulation on the exterior and use some very high super insulated windows concepts in here as much as possible. I don't know that we'll approach passive, but we will work very hard to incorporate as much as on all of the prefabricated detailing for passive house that we possibly can in this project. Yeah, so a little bit of this is a really not so great sketch about how that prefabricated element might be constructed and dropped into place in here. We're still working on this as in progress right now as we speak. It's very hot off the press. So we're really excited about that project, but I'm most excited about this MiniMax project. This is a big project for our office and a really exciting one. It has the potential of completely transforming our office. And it's an incredibly important project as a proof of concept for the Type 4C codes that I helped write. It's sailing through the city of Seattle. The building permits are all but signed off on. The master use permit is completed. It's in a downtown, not downtown, but Capitol Hill area, for those of you who know Seattle, a rather dense neighborhood, just a walking distance from downtown. And it's on a parking lot, which is this red zone. It's owned by an amazing nonprofit developer who's very venerable and respected in the community here, that's been around for decades to develop affordable housing. This is an existing building that they own and manage as well for 30% AMI income folks. And this project here is our project, which will be slated for middle income housing. I'm excited for this. I hope you all, I don't need to convince anybody. This building is really not seen that often. This is an 8-story Type 4C building on a little bit of concrete down here. That's a slab on grade and grade beams. And the rest of this is CLT floors and ceilings, exposed to the ceilings, covered with gypsum on the top, glulam columns and glulam beams, mass plywood panel stairs, both of them, one here and at the end, of course, and then some steel bracing, some BRBs around the core. It's an exciting project, and we're thrilled to be working with the team, incredibly integrated team on this. The power of our Revit models, of course, this is straight out of Revit, allows us to actually quantify some of these cubic meters of the materials we're using. And I only mention this because one of the most critical things about all of us working in mass timber is to work closely with our LCA scientists to help actually prove the proof of concept that these buildings are lower carbon than our concrete or or steel gauge buildings as a collaborative, and so as a comparative. So when we're beginning to design these buildings, we're also thinking about the material takeoffs, which we were lucky to be enough to be able to develop with the Nature Conservancy for this massive study that's about to come out. I just was on a conference call about an hour ago talking about when that study might be released, and I'm really grateful to hear that it will be coming out hopefully by this summer. And those LCA studies are showing the efficiency and the incredible performance of the mass timber as it performs relative to its comparables at this scale. But those are abstract models that we created as an office, and we put them in, and they're based very closely on the system. But we have, thanks to the technology out there, the Revit, the digital twin, as I've heard somebody on this call, these mass timber March Madness calls mention, this is the digital twin, and this is what the material takeoffs show us. And we can give this to our partners at the University of Washington, Indranil Ganguly and Francesca Pirabon, and just say, hey, can you run that again? Remember we did that for the LCA study back there for the Nature Conservancy? Can we do it now for this building? And the efficiency and the ability to update this with all of the materials that we now know are in this building, not just the superstructure, as this is showing, is a really exciting opportunity to test the proof of concept again that these buildings are indeed significantly lower footprint than their concrete and steel counterparts. It's an exciting moment to embrace technology and what it can do for us. So just briefly about the building, this is the building next door. It's on a broad avenue going up the hill. You can see the scale of the buildings. This does jump up in scale. It was very exciting to see that the city of Seattle rezoned a couple of these sites, including this one, not specifically for this site. And I can't even quite be sure if they really upzoned them for the Type 4C buildings, but I'd like to say that they were really visionary and smart enough to do that, because this is exactly an 85-foot height, which is exactly what Type 4C talks about. It's also really exciting because we're lower than the high-rise designation, because the floor is lower than 75 feet by just a little bit. So we don't trigger all the high-rise clauses. And it's a very exciting proposition to begin to think that this really could indeed be the first Type 4C building built, but also set a new level of density for Seattle for some of these buildings and surrounding vacant lots, which there's one right over here, for instance, that could be easily built up to a similar scale and not harm any of the delicate, historic neighborhoods and buildings, these beloved 1920s and 30s brick buildings that were also their version of workforce housing when they were built at that time. Here's the digital model. This is the digital twin, the overall building systems. And this is a design drawing, you all, but it's straight out of Revit. And what I've done is we've abstracted some of these elements. All of this modeling has been led by Swinnerton Mass Timber, and we have been inputting the architectural aspects into it. DCI Structural has inputted the structural model for all of the work into the model, but also our MEP and fire life safety contractors, the subs. This is all real information. There's a graphic kind of visual license that I've done by pulling these elements apart and sort of showing the different systems. But this is real stuff. That pipe right there, real fire pipe that brings it into the electrical fire life safety room, and then it provides the pump that go up to do these smaller sprinklers coming off of the corridors and into the units. That's all real data. It's real information, and to see it portrayed in here is a really exciting moment. It also shows very clearly the concrete podium. We all need concrete, the concrete foundation, the grade beams, the connection to the street. We're using a lot of concrete in this project, and we've minimized it as much. There's no sub-basement, there's no parking in this project, there's no parking required because it's close to 1,000 bus lines and walkable to almost any place you want to go. And then there's a little bit of the steel BRBs in here, along with our mass plywood panel stairs on both of the cores. It's a simple design that can be replicated in many cities and jurisdictions based on the unit and the layouts. So the project is just a couple of buildings. This is the existing building. This is Union Street to the north and 14th Avenue to the east. This is our new project here. We have a little pedestrian entry here because downtown is way to the left of this screen. Walking up and down, or South Lake Union is to the top of this screen to the north. So in terms of jobs, etc., for these middle income folks, 126 units, 66,000 square feet. There's a little entrance here and a little gated entrance here and a gated entrance here for both the residents of the Helen V and also the new building here with our lobby in the center here. And a shared courtyard for both sets of residences here. This is a view from the Union Street on the north side of the building. This is existing alley, an existing building, and this is the existing building in the back. You come off this street and back into the courtyard. There's some residential units on the exterior here that are open with small stoops to the street to provide some life and eyes on the street. And if you look carefully, you can just barely see a little bit of the ceilings of the CLT from below in here. Again, another view from that alley. Plan in more detail here, the courtyard entrances here, the lobby, the ground floor units. We have a little retail space on the corner and the typical floor plan above showing the cores and the smaller units as they go off the branch off the corridor. Again, more systems diagrams for the technology geeks on this call. It's incredibly exciting to see it. I'm reminded of these drawings I used to do for Bram Schordell as a young graduate student at Harvard, where we were doing exploded axonometrics of things like flutes and toasters and stuff. But you know, the technology just brings all of that home right here, of that complexity. It's really exciting. The unit stack. A little bit of detail on some of the way we were treating the fire coding, the fire protection. We did really embrace the codes, and it was a tremendous help when we were pushing it through. I shouldn't say pushing it, that sounds aggressive, because it wasn't. It was a very collaborative and congenial relationship with the Seattle Fire Department. They were amazing, and they've signed off on this project, and it's exciting that we followed the code and built it into the model, and it seems to be working beautifully. And really, of course, the whole point of this project was to provide an interior environment in a very small and humble way. This is a small unit with its own private bath, its own small kitchen, windows out to the street, to the north, in this case, looking over the city, looking over the tops of some territorial trees here. And that when you walk in this door, the sense of warmth and nature and livability comes alive to you as much as it does every day for me in my home. And the privilege of living in a home like that, like this, is provided then for the inhabitants of this small unit with the warm wood above and the warm wood of the glulam column and beam as they shape this experience of this small and humble unit. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions. And we can't wait for construction to start on that project. We believe it's going to start in June or July of this year. Yeah, that's all I have.
Right. Right. Thank you, Susan. You can see, like, you want to read the questions? There are a few coming in there on the Q&A as well as looks like on the chat.
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull them up. Okay, so Lloyd's got a question. Let me see, it looks like a good one. I have to read this carefully. Recently, the energy and construction industries hijacked the Code Commission. They did? Robert A. Yeah, he said if the changes will only serve select interest group, can they undo? All right, so Lloyd, you got to fill me in because I must have missed something. So I don't know. Lloyd, can you actually talk on this thing, Greg? Because I would be happy to have a discussion about this.
I think right now, because it's a webinar, he can do chats, but not as a live Zoom to Zoom, because it's not a Zoom meeting, it's a Zoom webinar. So maybe if Lloyd could elaborate on that.
Okay, so keep chatting. Give me some more prompts on this one. I've been having my heads down getting this project done, and I'm trying to pull away from the code process. Although I did submit a couple of, I will say this: we have been involved in the last year on some new fire tests that were different than the 5 tests that we had to do for the code process. So we did the 5 tests in 2017. They performed beautifully. The results are published, and that's what we based our code discussion with the code officials in April of 18, and when it passed in October of 18 and January 19 when it was ratified. So that is a complete package of work based on those fire tests. However, I will say that the code relationship to the fire tests, the codes were very conservative relative to what the performance of those fire tests actually showed. So then moving forward, we wanted to do more fire tests, and thanks to the US Forest Service and the American Wood Council and the Research Institute of Sweden, we were able to do some more fire tests. And we just completed those in October of 2020. And there is a completed fire report summary that's out on the Research Institute of Sweden's website. And it's really fascinating because these were even more mass timber was exposed within the same compartments. And it was an exciting process to be involved helping to write those test protocols, because we were really able to demonstrate that the safety of mass timber was even greater than those early 2017 tests had showed. And it was a really exciting moment to see that. So based on that, myself and a couple of other people who were involved in those tests, who were fire protection engineers, which, as you all know, I'm not, we submitted new code proposals through this new committee action process, which is going to be hearing in April. And it was to actually amend what we had passed in the earlier code work at the type 4A to actually allow up to 18 stories, a smaller percentage of open exposed ceilings, which is really exciting. It may or may not get passed, but we proposed it, and there's good backing for it and really thoughtful fire science to back that up. We've also proposed a greater percentage at the 4B level. We haven't changed 4A, so there's really just the 2 code proposals, but they're potentially very transformational as well, and will reduce the amount of gypsum wall board that we're needing to act as a fire protection agent at the top levels of the 4A, for instance. So that's in process. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, Lloyd, but if anything, we're pushing harder to have the codes reflect the reality of the tests that we're moving through, and we're very excited about that. And there will be more tests in the future because it's a very high performing, as you all know, material, and the codes were more conservative than we had hoped. So the next question is Shamanth. I'm not going to pronounce your first name or your last name very well, so I apologize. Let me read the question. Could you please explain what kind of connectors are used in the community use housing project? For instance, the connections to the foundation, the connectors for the post and beam. I'm going to actually punt on this question because I can't give you a good answer for it. They're steel, I do know that, and I'm going to rely. I'm happy to answer this question in the follow-up chat, but I'm going to rely on my excellent structural engineers at DCI in Portland, Shirley and Adam. And Kevin to begin to answer this question. I don't want to mess it up, and they have a very good answer. So you also, the next question is similar, and I'm sorry to be punting on this, but it's how is the connection between the columns and the concrete foundation in the last project? We have a detail for that, and I don't have a view of it right now. One of the challenges that those columns have is that unlike some of the smaller scale projects, we have to wrap all of the wood columns with a non-combustible material because of the fire code that is in the type 4C. So it was made more complex by that. And it's a very simple steel knife plate connection that works into the concrete foundation as a pour. And there's a couple of different variations because level changes, et cetera, is happening. But it is a surprisingly simple connection. Michael Weiner says, can Susan comment on the issue of the off-gassing of the glues in the mass timber? Are mass timber companies developing less toxic glues to improve interior air quality? I can totally comment on that because there isn't any. And I lived this experience, Michael, as a personal inhabitant of this house that I'm staying in. So I don't know where your comment is from, and if you've ever been in a house that has mass timber. Frankly, the surprise to me and the happy surprise was that I wasn't smelling any of the off-gassing from carpets. I wasn't smelling any of the off-gassing from other materials in a typical new building, new house, because all I could really smell, first of all, we didn't have any carpets, right? Because we had mass timber floors, and then we have just a simple 3-inch concrete lightweight topping slab on the first floor that's got integrated radiant heat in it. But all I could smell was pine. There's the smell of the wood. So I have to respectfully just disagree with this question because that's not been anything close to my experience. The smell actually lingered in a beautiful, beautiful way for a good year, in a very strong way. And now we've lived in this house for 6 years, and we just came back from, I guess it was about a week or so. We were driving across the mountains over to Montana with my family. And so we were gone for a week, and it was in the winter and the house was tightened up and closed down. And we came back and there was that smell again, that beautiful smell of the wood as we walked in. It wasn't as strong as that first year, but it was really amazing. Next question, would you recommend timber as cladding or exposed structural elements with significant different weather conditions in winter and summer? Timber as cladding is different than mass timber as cladding. And so just to be clear about your question, there is a kind of a misconception that, oh, you just build a mass timber house and it's got this insulative quality and it can, shed rain. Well, that's just, I hope you all know that's not the case. Mass timber is if it's used properly, is a structural element, and it can't be exposed to weather, especially rain, because especially in our kind of climate here with the rain all the time, because it's a structural element and eventually it will mold and decay. So definitely not expose mass timber as a structural element. If you want to expose it as a decorative or cladding element, that's one thing. But I would recommend using timber as a cladding, and you do mention that, timber as a cladding. So I'm hoping that's what you actually meant. And absolutely, yeah. I mean, we have timber, we have 1x4 Shaoshugiban on the exterior of our house. We're going to be using timber as a cladding on our smaller 3-story R&D modular project, on the house in the Mazama. Absolutely, it's a time-honored traditional material from eons to use cladding, and if it's used and detailed properly with the rain screens, etc., it will shed the weather and provide good evaporative qualities as well as good insulative qualities as well. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, Lloyd, there's an easier one. Acoustics can be a big issue with CLT. flanking around the edges. How are you dealing with this in multifamily? Very carefully, very, very carefully. We are working with a great acoustical engineering company, Greenbush Acoustics, here in Seattle, and the CLT was somewhat new to them, but the issues are pretty straightforward. We're also working really closely with, as you all know, this amazing organization, Woodworks, and Woodworks has been for a long time accumulating all of the studies about the acoustics and the performance for CLT, and so with the CLT, there's a whole bunch of testing, right? If you have a floor assembly, if you have a wall assembly, and you have to meet the STC ratings and the IIC ratings, et cetera. And so these are code-related issues, and and mass timber has to perform as a code element, just as it would any other material would. So it's necessary to either have tests that are done or tests that will be done for a particular product. Luckily, we've been able to use existing tests with existing acoustical products, and they're outlined. It's really, really helpful study that Woodworks put out that was led by Vicki McLean, and I would highly recommend it. You can just Google it, acoustics, Woodworks, CLT, Vicki McLean, and it'll pop right up. It's about a 30-40 page document, and it has a whole series of assemblies with CLT, 3-ply, 5-ply, different manufacturers with different acoustical ratings, and it is a really, really important issue, and believe me, we have met that code. I hope that answered your question, Lloyd. From Scott Noble. For the Seattle 8-story, can you talk about the procurement process for the CLT and what role Swinnerton played in that process? Yeah, I mean, it's not finished yet, Scott, is the short answer. And the second short answer is that it's all about Swinnerton Mass Timber. They've been phenomenal in leading this project. We're actually in a design build contract to them. They are our client for at least contractually. We are working with the owner, as I mentioned, very closely, but Swinnerton has really been phenomenal in leading that process, both on the general side as well as the mass timber side. And we'll let you know how it turns out as soon as we pull those contracts. Anonymous attendee, can you comment on the facade for the building? Are they also prefabricated, and what are the materials? Yeah, that's a really good question, because we looked really closely with Swinnerton at a project at a possibility of doing prefabricated facade elements, much like the Brock Commons project. And it became an issue of cost that at that time, which was now a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago almost, it's about a year ago, we were looking at that issue. Our team just couldn't make it work. We were hoping for those simplified picks and putting, a unit by unit element, because they're very repetitive in a simple prefabricated way, but also in a very urban way, in a very kind of Berlin, Central European, large European cities, that 22-meter Kanthöhe in German, that the height of the top of the parapets is very close to the traditional Scandinavian and Central European cities. And would have easily lended itself to a prefabricated, which is one of the reasons it's such a simple facade. But instead, we will be putting it up in a traditional way after the CLT is launched into place, which we expect to happen very quickly on this project and save a lot of time on the schedule. We will then be adding hardy and, of course, insulation, waterproofing hardy with their rain screen. So fiber cement panels on the exterior. I think that's all for the questions. I don't know how much more time we have. I'm happy to engage any other questions, but Greg, help me out at how you want to proceed.
Oh, we generally like to run up to an hour. We're at 50 minutes, so it's essentially kind of up to you. If there are more questions coming in, or anything else you'd like to share, and how people can keep up with Susan for the things you're doing and your activities and project. I think that's always helpful.
Oh, that's super, super sweet, Greg. Well, just to answer that directly, this is the third presentation I've given in less than 24 hours, so I'm a little weary probably for this. And you'll see me a lot for the International Mass Timber Conference. I mean, Craig and Arnie asked me to be a co-host with Will, so you're going to see a lot of my face then. And then there's a fireside chat that's coming up. I'm really looking forward to next week. It's really interesting, all of these different conferences, this Mass Timber Madness that you're hosting, Greg, the one on the East Coast, the Architects Newspaper is hosting. I think it started today. And then, of course, the big one next week, which is with the Forest Business network. It's really exciting. But you know, we're working on a number of things, and we're really introducing this a new generation of projects. As I've mentioned, I've also I want to say that, you know, most of our work for this larger building is completed, and as a design firm, we are so revved up and excited to pull all of this energy from this project into the next project. And so what you know, one thing that's very exciting to all of the people who are listening on this call is that this is a model that is easily replicable in multiple cities across the US right now. It addresses a really severe and critical need for equity in our housing supplies chain, affordability, middle income affordability in our urban infill situations across most every major metropolitan area. It's a lower carbon alternative, and it's a simple and easy to build replicable thing. It's not a modular mass timber, you know, 8-story high rise by any means, but the systems that are in place are easily replicable by the team that designed this building. And I'm really, I believe we will be the first team to pull that permit for the city of Seattle for a type 4C building. You know, I can't guarantee that yet, knock on wood. We haven't pulled it yet, but all of the significant issues have been negotiated and determined. And I'm really excited to do the next one and present at this next conference next year, Greg, Mass Timber 3.0. So with that, I want to turn